Yes, Hashem. Today's daf is the beginning of Masechta Horayos Daf Beis, and Bez Hashem we start this Masechta. So, just one point. The point is that when a person does an avera, let's say he ate blood by accident, or he's mechal Shabbos, or he eats non-kosher fats of an animal, then he has to bring a korban chatas. If he did it by mistake, what our Masechta is discussing in the beginning regarding what happens. He didn't really make a mistake, but Bezdin made a psak that this type of fats of the animal is kosher. You're allowed to eat it. And this person went ahead and ate it because he was relying on the psak of Bezdin. So, our Mishnah is of the opinion that no matter what, if you heard from the Bezdin, and this is the Bezdin that's in Yerushalayim, Bezdin that sat in the base of Migdash, the Bezdin of 71, if they paskin this fat is mutter, and you went ahead and ate that fat, and then the Bezdin retracted their psak and said, "Oh, it's not kosher." So you did it by accident. You're exempt from bringing a personal korban chatas. And what the halacha is if, let's say, over 50% of the tzibur followed Bezdin's psak, then the Bezdin has to bring a special korban called a par, a cow, for a korban. But if the Bezdin does not have most of the tzibur following their psak, it didn't have enough time for most of the tzibur following their psak. According to our Mishnah, the individual does not bring a korban chatas, and also Bezdin does not bring a par helm davar shel tzibur. It's just a mistake that happened. Now, I just want to point out, when an individual makes a mistake and brings a korban chatas, it's usually from a female sheep or a female goat. So let's read the Mishnah, and we start over here. We start the Masechta with the first words over here. Okay. Hayru Bezdin lavar al achas mikol mitzvahs hamurs b'Torah. If the Bezdin said that they paskin that you can transgress one of the mitzvahs that is said in the Torah. For example, they paskin that a certain fats is permitted. Okay, and this individual went and he followed by mistake following the Bezdin. They said it's permitted, it's kosher, so he did exactly that. Bein sha'asu v'asu imahim, whether they did bein sha'asu v'asu imahim, whether the Bezdin actually, if you saw people of the Bezdin eat that fats, and he followed along. Bein sha'asu, whether the Bezdin did it first, also achrayim, and the individual did it after. Let's say the Bezdin ate it on Wednesday, and the rest of the tzibur started eating it on Thursday. Bein shalayasu, even if the Bezdin themselves, people on the court, did not eat that fats, va'asa, but the individuals started to eat that fats, potter, they're exempt. And they're exempt from their korban chatas if Bezdin realizes they made a mistake. But nay, because they made a mistake because they relied on Bezdin. So because he relied on Bezdin, so he's exempt from his personal korban chatas. So he doesn't have to bring a personal korban chatas. And if most of the tzibur followed Bezdin, then the Bezdin is going to bring one korban chatas for everybody called the par helem davar shel tzibur. They bring this big cow. Haru Bezdin the yoda echad mehem shato. Let's say Bezdin paskin, and one of them knew that they made a mistake. One individual knew that the Bezdin made a mistake. Or Talmud, he could be a student. He learned and he knows better than the people on the court. And he is somebody who is so knowledgeable. He knows Bekius and Eon. He knows how to learn. So really, in his heart, he knew Bezdin is wrong. And he followed the Bezdin anyway, because he thought maybe it's a mitzvah to listen to Bezdin, and he ate the chayla, but he ate the fats, but he knew that Bezdin made a mistake. So there, since you individually knew that Bezdin made a mistake, so you're going to be chayiv your own korban chatas. Bein she'asu v'asu imam, whether they did it or they did it with him. Bein she'asu v'asu achreim, whether the Bezdin did it and he followed them. Bein she'loy asu v'asu, Bezdin didn't do it, v'asa and he did it, so he did it for sure by himself. So therefore, Arei Chayev, because he's liable for his own korban chatas. Why? Because he wasn't relying on Bezdin. He individually knew that Bezdin made a mistake. So why did he go? So his only mistake was that he thought there's a mitzvah to ignore your own conscience and follow whatever the Bezdin says, and eat the fats. So really, he wasn't totally relying on the psak of Bezdin. Because of that, therefore, he's liable for his own korban chatas. Zaklal, this is the general rule. If you rely on yourself, that means you didn't pay attention to Bezdin, but you know what the right thing to do would be. So then, chayev, you're liable for the korban chatas. But if you so relied on Bezdin, you don't know anything about anything. Bezdin said it's mutter, and you say they know better than me, and this thing is mutter. So then you're potter from your korban chatas if it turns out that Bezdin got it wrong. Now, Amar Shmuel. So again, let's say more than 50% of the congregation of the tzibor followed Bezdin's psak. So Bezdin has to bring what's known as a par helam davar shatzibur. If Bezdin realizes they made a mistake, they have to bring this korban called a par helam davar shatzibur. Par, the cow, helam davar, that they made a mistake, they ignored something, and because of that made an erroneous psak. So therefore, they would have to bring a par. So Amar Shmuel said, "La'olam ein Bezdin chayavim." Bezdin is not liable lehem mutarin atem, until the psak was issued forth from Bezdin. You're mutter to eat this. You're mutter with this fats is mutter. Okay, let's call it fats. This fats is permitted, but Rav Dimi from Nerdoi says it's not enough. Until they say to the people, you're permitted to do something. For example, in our case, Bezdin would have to say that you're permitted to eat this fats. If they just say that you're just permitted, that's not enough. My tama, what's the reason? Because the psak is not completed. Because until they say you're actually allowed to do something, just by saying it's permitted is not enough. It's not a complete statement. Amar Abaya said, we have a support for this in a brisa. This is another area which is called the Zakin Mamre, which we discussed in Masechet Sanhedrin. If some older person doesn't want to listen to Bezdin, and he commanded his townspeople to do, if he just taught them, that's not enough. But if he commanded his townspeople to follow lasos, then he's liable. So you see that a psak is when they tell you it's permitted and you're allowed to do something. You're allowed to eat. Amar Abaya, Amar Abba, Afananam Tini. I have another support for this. Hayrullah Bezdin Lihina say. 1/8 said to a woman, hey, your husband died. So Bezdin paskin for her that she could get married to somebody else. So instead of getting married to somebody else, she went and had znus with another person. Now, and then it turns out that her husband, that Bezdin made a mistake, and really she was married. Her husband showed up. So, and she did it by mistake. Now, if she wasn't married and had relations with somebody, then there's, she did an avera, but she's not chayiv a korban. It's not it's a karis. But if it turns out she was married and she had relations with a strange person, chayev is bekarban. She's in this case chayev a korban. They gave her strict, specific instructions that you are permitted to get married to somebody else. They did not give her specific instructions that you are free to have relations with whomever. So this married woman only had permission to marry somebody else. But and if she in the interim had relations with a strange person, so that's her doing wrong, and she'll be liable to a carbon if it turns out that Bezdin paskin wrong because her husband is still alive. So we see a complete psak of Bezdin has an action verb associated with it. Ravina, I have the final raya. Afanana mitnina, I have a perfect raya, proof. Horu Bezdin, if Bezdin paskins, la'avor al achas mikol hamitzvahs hamuris b'Torah. Here, the Mishnah says that Bezdin paskin that you can transgress any one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. It's not any one of the mitzvahs, but what it means is that the mitzvahs that have chorus associated with it. So there, the Bezdin paskins la'avor, you can transgress. So therefore, we see from here that a complete psak is when they say you can transgress something. Tu loy midig, no more questions asked. So in this version, it was Shmuel who said mutar atem is good enough, and Rav Dimi said no. Bezdin has to say mutar atem la'asois, to do. So the Rav Dimi seems more correct than Shmuel. But Ika de Amre, others have the opinions reversed, but the questions are still the same. Alma Shmuel said, Ein Bezdin chayavan achyirim lehem mutarim atem la'asois. Shmuel was the one that said Bezdin has to say mutar to do. Rav Dimi from Dari says afilu mutarim atem, even mutarim atem is good enough. Nigmar hara that's enough of a complete psak. They asked all these questions against Rav Dimi. So we see that a psak includes an action verb to it. So we see that Bezdin has to add a word that she's permitted to get married. That's the psak. And Amar Rabina said, well, like Tanan Hachi, Hari Bezdin Laval al Achas Mikol Mitzvahs or Amuras B'Torah, that the psak of Bezdin has to be that they're permitted to transgress one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. So the Bezdin has to give clear instructions that you're allowed to do something. You're allowed to eat this fats. You're allowed to eat this blood. You're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos in a certain way. That's what they have to tell you. And that's clear in the Mishnah. That's the way a psak is. They give you clear instructions, not that it's permitted, but you're permitted to do something. Exactly the way Shmuel said it. So, and Rav Dardoi is questionable. Tulay Midi, you have no question. Shmuel is correct that a complete psak includes mutarim atem la'asois. Then the Mishnah said, "V'holach hayachid v'also shoygig al piyam." Says the Gemara, the yachid went and did a mistake according to the psak on the mouth of the Bezdin. V'also shoygig al piyam. V'nisnev also al piyam. Shoygig lamali. Why does it say the word mistake? In other words, the question is, the person's eating this fat. He's not eating the fats by mistake. He's also he's just following the Bezdin. Bezdin said that this piece of fat that I have here is mutter. So if Bezdin says that, he's eating it, but he's not eating it by mistake. So what does the Mishnah mean by that? So here, Amar Rava said a very interesting thing. Shoygig, even if he made a mistake, he would be considered to be potter from a carbon. La'atuya, that includes, it adds something that you wouldn't see from the Mishnah. Hoyre Bezdin shechelav mutter. Let's say Bezdin paskin that fats are mutter, and this guy so he exchanged it, and he thought he was eating the chelav that Bezdin. He thought he was eating kosher fats, shuman, and it turns out he ate the chelav that Bezdin said is mutter. So he didn't intend to eat the chelav. He only intended to eat real kosher fats. So then he's potter. He's potter. Al piyam mamish. On there, but he's potter from a carbon. Why? Al piyam mamish. In their mouth, they said that this is permitted. So even if he had no intention to eat the chelav that Bezdin said, he was intending to eat something else, and he accidentally ate that chelav that Bezdin says is permitted, and it turns out that Bezdin made a mistake, so he wasn't really eating al pihem, but nevertheless, this would include in the Mishnah that even if he was a shoygeg, he would be a potter from a carbon, and then al piyam means al piyam mamish if he actually followed the bezdin. So in two cases, you're going to be potter from a carbon, whether you followed the bezdin exactly or you didn't want to follow the bezdin, but you ended up following the bezdin because you wanted to eat a kosher shuman, and you ended up eating the fats that the bezdin permitted. The Ikadi Amre, just the opposite. Amar Rava said, Shoygig al PM who the potter. Only if you followed exactly what Bezdin said and you intended to eat the chaylev, then you're potter from a carbon chatas. If you had a miscommunication and you exchange your shuman, your kosher fats, with the chaylev that Bezdin said is okay, you'll be chayav a carbon chatas. Milsa, so this is the Ikadi Amri. Milsa the pshitele Rava, kumaboyle Rami Bachama. This was simple to Rava. Rami Bachama wasn't so sure. The boy Rami Bachama asked the question: Hari Bezdin shechelev mutav in his chalaf loy b'shuma machol maho. If this case, Bezdin paskin that the fats are mutar, and he wanted to eat shuman, and he ended up eating the chelev that Bezdin paskin that was permitted. This was a question that Rami Bachama asked. Rava said, Tashma, that's exactly what the Mishnah said. Halach Yachid, also Shoygig al PM. So the Shoygig al PM nominally. What does it say? Shoygig. Lav Latuye doesn't include like the first version of Rava, that you're potter. That's what Shoygig includes. Not just al PM mamish, but even a Shoygig in this case. If you exchange the shuma with the chaylev, you'll also be potter. So the Gemara says no. Dilma shoygig al piyam mutabav av nischal loy chaylev b'shuma b'chol chayev. That's what Rami Bachama asked. How do you know? Maybe just mamish you have to be a shoygig, following the orders of Bezdin. But if you had this mix-up, you'll be chayev. Igidami Rava said the opposite. Hashma halach yosef rachem v'asa shoygig al piyam. My like shoygig al piyam who the potter nischal loy chaylev b'shuma b'chol chayev. So the Rami Bachama answer back. You don't see it from the Mishnah. Maybe the Mishnah Dilma Oishaygig. Maybe the Mishnah seems to include both that you're potter. So biplukta. This isn't really a machlokes. Hayri bezdin shechelev muta minischalev loy chelev b'shuman v'acholei. Bezdin paskin chelev the fats is permitted, and this person didn't eat the chelev directly with intention. He mixed it up with kosher fats. Rav says you're potter from a carbon chatas. Rabbi Yochanan Omar chayev. Rabbi Yochanan says you're going to be chayev a carbon chatas. Meisvei. Let me ask you a question. Me'ama oretz ba'asoisa. A ama oretz who does a carbon chatas, does a mistake, he has to bring his own personal carbon chatas. That's what the Chumash says. If you make a mistake, you have to bring the carbon chatas. Prat, this exempts lumshumid, somebody who converted to becoming a goy, right? And he would have violated the mitzvah anyway. So even if he wants to bring a carbon chatas, we don't accept it from him. Let's say he does tshuva, because when he was a meshumad, he would have eaten it anyway, even if it turns out that he only did this aver by mistake. Let's give the example. A chaylev, he was going to, he intended to eat shuman, and he ate chaylev, real chaylev. So if he was a Jew, then he has to bring a carbon chatas. But if he's a meshumad, he's trying to convert. So since if he would have known it was chaylev anyway at that time, he would have eaten it. So he's exempt from a carbon chatas. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Shimon ben Yosi, Omer Mishum Rav Shimon. He says also a meshumad is potter, but he has another pasuk. Only if you were notified and you made a mistake, then you bring a carbon chatas. If he would have been notified that he's eating chaylev, he would have stopped. Then maybe carbon nachlush. He brings a carbon on the shaygin. Maybe carbon al. But if he didn't. If he wouldn't have stopped eating at that time, so then he doesn't bring a carbon chatas, because so that exempts a meshumad. A meshumad wouldn't have stopped eating. A meshumad wouldn't have stopped eating if he would have realized that he was chaylev. If Rabbi Yochanan is correct, This guy, why is the person who's hired bezin shchela muta, and then they told him, oh, by the way, you're eating chalev, but the chalev belonging, that chalev is only chalev, it's permitted because Bezdin said it would be permitted. So he wouldn't have stopped. He wouldn't have stopped because he thought he's eating shuman. It turns out that he was eating chalev. That chalev was permitted by Bezdin. So if you would have told him, oh, by the way, you're not eating shuman, you're eating the chalev that was permitted by Bezdin, non-kosher fats that was permitted by Bezdin, he wouldn't have stopped eating. So why could Rabbi Yochanan say that such a person brings a carbon chatas? Only time that you bring a carbon chatas is had I told you in the middle of your act that you are making a mistake, you would have stopped what you're doing. In this case, you wouldn't have stopped what you're doing because they would have told you also that Bezdin permitted this type of chalev. Omar Papa says, Rabbi Yochanan holds, if Bezdin would have known that it's real fats, they also would have regretted. And he would have also stopped. This is considered that somebody who would admit his mistake and stop what he's doing. So really, if at that moment, if they told him, hey, that you're eating chalev, but it's only permitted because Bezdin said it's permitted, he wouldn't have stopped. But nevertheless, had Bezdin realized they made a mistake, Bezdin would have retracted their psak. He would have also stopped eating. So that's enough to be mechayiv him a carbon chatas. Okay, but that's Shumad would not. Amar of Rava said, Moide Rav. Marv said that Bezdin, Hoyre Bezdin shechelav mutav, and it's chalav lo chelav b'shuman. Rav says he's parta. But Moide Rav would agree, she'ena mashal Rav Tzimra, that he wouldn't, let's say you have exactly 50% of the Jewish people followed Bezdin. And this guy, who's the one guy, he didn't really follow Bezdin, he just thought he was eating Shuman and ate that chelav. He wouldn't be counted towards the tzibur. So that Bezdin will have to bring a par. Why? My timer, Amakra, the Pasuk says, Bishkoga. You have to make a mistake. Ache kulam bishkoga achas, until everybody makes the same mistake. Everybody followed exactly what Bezdin said and ate the chalev on purpose. But this guy didn't eat the chalev on purpose. He ate the chalev on by mistake. So therefore, he would not be considered. He would not be considered liable. Bein she'asu v'asu iman lama leila misnikol hami bishlam ereisa loizu avzu kudani el seif the ibchem abayale. So we go on my base. Zu ve'im sarach loim zu katani. Basically the Mishnah is usually tells you the most chiddush last. It leads up to the most chiddush. So if the guy followed Bezdin, whether he did it just if Bezdin did it and he did it with them, right? Everybody did it together, or he followed Bezdin, or Bezdin didn't do it and he did it, he's still considered a follower of Bezdin. So even though Bezdin never did it, he did it, he's considered a follower of Bezdin. So the beginning of the Mishnah is a step by step to lead to a bigger chiddush. But in the second case of the Mishnah, the steps lead to a lower chiddush. If you go with that order, since this guy is following his own, so you would say that lowest chiddush is that if Bezdin didn't do it and he did it, of course he's chayav his own carbon chatas. So the question was, is that the way Mishnayos are formatted? That you always you generally Mishnayos are formatted where you tell the bigger chiddush going in the third step. So the Gemara answers that it wanted to give it congruent. So the first three steps of the Mishnah is giving you steps that lead to a bigger chiddush. The second step, the second grouping of the Mishnah is it tells you the biggest chiddush first and then leads to the non-big chiddush last. Says the Gemara. Okay, another couple of minutes here. If someone saw that Bezdin made a mistake, either he's a student and he could paskin himself, student and paskin for himself. What's tarti lamali? What do you mean both? Rava said, Israch, I would have thought, Salka daita kamina hani mili goma b'savar. Ava goma v'loy savar. If he just says Talmud, right? Talmud means he knows everything and he could paskin. So that has to be somebody who brings his whole korban chatas. But if he was just a learned person, but not somebody that thinks deeply, or I might think that he would be exempt from a korban chatas because he needs bezdin. So therefore, the Mishnah teaches you extra words. If he knows bezdin made a mistake, whether he's a super Talmud Chacham or he's just a mini Talmud Chacham, which is somebody that could paskin, but he doesn't really know deep Gemaras, he doesn't know Svara, he doesn't know logic. Nevertheless, he can also, since he doesn't really rely on Bezdin, he also liable for his own personal Kol Bechatas. Amalei Abai just agrees to Rava. He says, but the words Lahira Gama V'Sava Mashma. Lahira means that he knows both. He knows how to learn, and he knows how to deduce via logic, come up with new ideas. So they both see the same thing. Talmud is Gama V'Sava, and Roy Lahira is the same thing. Amalei. So Rabbi said, that's what I meant. If we just have Talmud, Havamina Hanamina Gama V'Sava, Avagama Loy Sava Loy Tana Roy Lahira. The Mishnah Yisera, because it added extra words, it said Talmud and Roy Lahasara. We include Afilat Gamar, even if he's such a person, the Loy Savar, doesn't have svara. He's not such an intense, deep person. Savar v'loy Gamar, he can think deeply, but he doesn't know Bikiyas. Even then, if they feel that Bezdin made a mistake, even if they're not a super Talmud Chacham, and they went and followed Bezdin, they will be liable for their own personal karma chatas. Roy Lahira, who's somebody that is a super Talmud Chacham, Kagoin Man, Omarava, Kagoin Shimon ben Azar v'Shimon ben Zoyma. Shimon ben Azar and Shimon ben Zoyma was not on the Sanhedrin, they weren't married, but they were super Talmud Chachamim. Says the Gemara, if they know that Bezdin made a mistake, and they did it, so why do they bring a karbachatas? They did it on purpose. Amalei Abaya said, Ki hai gavna mezidah. Aren't they doing it on purpose? Says the Gemara, Ula Taimeich, according to your reason, you're right, that's a good question. Hodetanya, Basoise Achas, Yocharais Mepiatzmai Chai, Beraz Bezdin Potter. Ketzat. What's the case? There's a brisa. Hore Bezdin Shkela Muta Venoid Lechem Em Shito. Oish Talmud Geshel's name, Roy Lairok, Kagon Shimon Ben Nazir, Yochel Yehi Potter, Talmud Loima, Basoise Achas, Yocharais Mepiatzmai Chai, Beraz Bezdin Potter. So here, the Brisa gives you the example of Shimon ben Azai, who knows everything, and if he follows Bezdin, he has to bring a karbachatas. So the same question that you ask against me, you ask against the Brisa, which says if Shimon ben Azai followed the Bezdin, he's chayiv a karbachatas. Wait a minute, if he knows Bezdin, if Shimon ben Azai knew Bezdin making a mistake, then why is Shimon ben Azai bringing a karbachatas for a mistake? Elahecha mishkachas law. How are you going to answer the brisa? Kegoin the yada da asa. The man Shimon ben Azai knew it's asa. The ketoi, and the only mistake he made is b'mitzvah l'shmoya divrei chachamim. He thought that it's permitted to listen to chachamim. Actually, it's a mitzvah. Bezdin says chaylev is mutter, right? Even though they said it's permitted, you're supposed to show that whatever Bezdin says, you're going to follow. So that's the mistake. So I'm going to say the same thing. That these are great people, and Bezdin Paskin, they knew that Bezdin was wrong. Nevertheless, they felt that they're going to follow what Bezdin says, and because there's a mitzvah to listen to Bezdin and eat it. So because they're making that kind of mistake, they're kayev a korban kata. Then the final thing we'll learn, zahaklal, atoyle ba'atzmai. If you're relying on yourself, you're kayev a korban chatas. La suimai, what does that include? That you see the Mishnah added those extra words. It gives you a general rule. Well, I could figure out the general rule by myself. Why does the Mishnah repeat a general rule? It includes this: the sui mebai bahara. Even if a guy, let's say he's a general cantankerous person, whatever Bezdin says, he never listens to it anyway. So that him, since he never would have listened to Bezdin anyway, no matter which direction. So if he turns out to follow Bezdin, he's not going to be exempt from his own personal carbon chatas. Toilet Bezdin, the Mishnah said that if you rely on Bezdin, you're potter. Lasui, this includes Hoyer Bezdin, V'yadu Shatol, V'chazru Behen. Bezdin Paskin, right? Whether they brought the kapara, whether they didn't bring the kapara. And this Yochid followed the Bezdin. He's potter because he's doing it Bershus Bezdin. So even if Bezdin doesn't bring the carbon chatas, the carbon power helam davashet sibar, since he's totally relying on Bezdin, then you're potter. Doesn't it say that in the next Mishnah? Rab Shimon potters. Tana of Adam Musharsh. Here, the Tana gives you in a hint and then it explains it. Basically, what we're learning over here is that usually, if you follow Bezdin, you're potter from a carbon chatas. But you would think that the reason why you're potter from a carbon chatas is because Bezdin is going to bring one big par for everybody. But that's not the case. Because our Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which we're going to learn tomorrow, that even if only 40% of the Klal Yisrael follow Bezdin, where Bezdin is not going to bring a power helam davish tzibur, nevertheless, those 40% that follow the Bezdin in their erroneous psak will not have to bring a carbon chatas. This is not the halacha. Halacha is that, like the Chachamim, who says that only if Bezdin brings a power helam davish tzibur, only then is the individual exempt. And this is the sugya of tomorrow regarding Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim.